We've talked about this a few times, but I do really think that drop sets, rest pause, myo reps, cluster sets, all these kind of things kind of fit into the same bucket.
I'll kind of frame this using two approaches.
Mm-hmm.
The first is drop sets. So drop set would be you get to failure or close to failure with a given load. The second approach is what I'll call rest pause. Typically includes keeping the load the same, but anywhere from like 5 to 30 seconds, have them pick the weight up again, go to failure or to a certain number of RIR, and then you can potentially do that again and again.
We've talked about this a few times, but I do really think that, I don't know what you'd call these, maybe like extended set techniques, maybe, or they used to be called like intensity techniques, but I don't know
Yeah.
if I'd call it that. But let's call
I actually really like extended sets.
Yeah.
So let's go with that.
so yeah, the umbrella term of like extended set techniques. So you got drop sets, rest pause, myo reps, cluster sets, all these kind of things kind of fit into the same bucket. And I still think like for both optimization crowd reasons, but also efficiency crowd reasons, I think this is like one of the most under-researched areas, because if we can essentially equate the stimulus or equate our results in a fraction of the time, that's either just going to make, getting the same stimulus way more efficient for somebody who's got a time cap, or for people who are looking to optimize things, potentially allows you to fit in more stimulus across the week and potentially reach even higher peaks. So I think just in general, this area of research is really interesting, but there was a recent study that you dug into a little bit here that I think sheds light on this topic even more.
Yeah. I really like how you teed it up as set extension methods. And I'll kind of frame this using two approaches that I think are the most common, but I'll also say that there are other approaches. The first is drop sets. So drop set would be you get to failure or close to failure with a given load. You drop the load by, say, anywhere from 20 to 60%. You run it back. You go closer to failure again, and you might even have multiple drops within there. So you're taking that first set and you're extending it because you're fatigued, you're dropping the load, and you're continuing to potentially accrue stimulus. The second approach is what I'll call rest pause. And rest pause training typically includes keeping the load the same. So if you get to failure or close to failure with the given load, you rest for a little bit so you can kind of allow some recovery to occur, and then you can squeeze out more reps. I'm going to purposefully conflate rest pause and myo reps here. So for our discussion, we'll kind of use those synonymously, even though I know that there are not all rest pause training is myo rep training, but I do think myo rep training is a form of rest pause training.
Yeah, that's how I've always viewed it.
That's how I viewed it.
Yeah.
But
I view them as the same thing, honestly.
Yeah.
But whatever.
But myo reps are a common way to approach that. So the way that I would program a myo rep protocol is you do one set and then you rest. It kind of depends on the exercise and it depends on the person, but anywhere from like 5 to 30 seconds, have them pick the weight up again, go to failure or to a certain number of RIR, and then you can potentially do that again and again. I'd say on average, I would ask someone to do like 3 mini sets. So 1 activation set and then 3 smaller mini sets with 7 or 5 to 30 seconds of rest before each mini set. So again, that's a set extension method where you have that activation set, but you're allowing some mini recovery in there to squeeze out some productive reps potentially. So that's kind of our 2 approaches is basically, do we drop the load and do drop sets, or do we do these mini rests and do rest pause? And there was a study that came out in, I think it was technically published in January of 2025 by Vargas Molina and colleagues. And I liked this study for a few reasons. And the reason is the way that they actually controlled the variables at play here. Okay. So the tricky thing when you're studying either one of these, whether it's drop sets or rest pause, is you kind of have 3 variables that are impossible to hold constant at the same time. Okay, so you have reps in reserve, or just the overall difficulty or effort of the set, how close to failure you get. You have total reps completed throughout the protocol, and you have the load used, right? Because you're going to compare this rest pause group to a traditional training group, right? And when you add in this kind of this set extension method, it just gets a little bit hazy because you want to equate as much as you can to the traditional group. So a common approach we see in rest pause training is that you equate the total reps and the load, but not RAR. So I'll give you a basic example. Let's say that you are in the traditional group and I'm in the rest pause group. Maybe you do a set of 10 reps with 75% of your 1 rep max. Awesome. That's maybe 2 RAR, something like that. And then if I'm in the rest pause group, I would also do 10 reps with 75% of my 1 rep max, but maybe I would rest a little bit between rep 5 and 6. So I'm kind of doing this rest pause approach, but you can imagine there that now that 10th rep with 75% of my 1 rep max is easier. It's further away from failure than Zach's is. So I kind of, sure, I was less fatigued in reps 6 through 10, but that fatigue might actually be a good thing. So long story short, it's tricky to study because depending on whether the main goal of the program is strength or hypertrophy.
That's a crucial difference.
Yeah, exactly. You might prioritize controlling or not controlling certain things. So it gets a little bit hazy. And what I liked about this study is that they did find a way to equate reps in reserve. Okay, so in other words, the reps in reserve at the end of each set or each like mini set was similar. This was at the expense of load. Okay, so what that means is that the group that trained with the rest pause protocol did use a heavier load. In my opinion, I think this is a good thing. I think if the main outcome the researchers are interested in is hypertrophy, I would like to see RAR equated. I don't want that rest pause group to just train further from failure as a result. So let's get into the specifics of the study a little bit so you can see how they actually did that. So they had 10 trained participants, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they did do a within study design such that one leg of each individual was in each group. So you can kind of think of it as 10 participants per group or 20 total legs included in the study. The study was 8 weeks long, 2 sessions per week, and they trained both the leg press and the leg extension. So how did they compare traditional straight sets to rest pause training? And how did they control for RAR? Again, I'm not going to say this design is perfect, but I also really liked I was really happy to see it in the research because it is a novel approach here and one that I think gives us some more practical implications for hypertrophy training. So the traditional group trained with 5 sets of 12. So 5 sets of 12 on each exercise twice a week, so 20 total sets in the traditional group. And the load was adjusted set to set to achieve 0 to 1 reps in reserve. So awesome. Really nice hypertrophy training design, training to or close to failure, good solid rest between sets, solid volumes, awesome. Great group for traditional. What they did in the rest pause side of each person's body is they also did 5 sets of 12. They also trained at 0 to 1 RAR, but they kind of treated each set of 12 as 3 mini sets of 4. So what they did is they did basically 3 clusters, you can think of it as. So they put on their 4 rep max load, hit 4 reps, rested 20 seconds, hit 4 more reps, rested 20 seconds, and hit 4 more reps. It does seem that they had to drop the load across those clusters. It wasn't entirely clear in the manuscript how exactly they did that, but they did emphasize the fact that those clusters were 0 to 1 reps in reserve, or at least pretty dang close to it, because that was the target, and that's how they were adjusting the load accordingly. So after they finished each set of 12, which was really 3 clusters of 4 reps, they rested for 3 minutes. So basically the programs were the exact same. The only difference is the rest pause group got 20 seconds of rest twice within each set. And as a result, they were able to use heavier loads. Does that generally make sense?
Yeah.
If it does, I can move into the results here.
Yeah, so just to quickly recap, total reps equated, sets equated in a way, and then proximity to failure is equated. The only thing that's different is the percentage of 1RM, which may be relevant for strength results if you get to that, but for hypertrophy, probably less of a concern.
Yeah, before we get to the results, this is why it's so tricky to study rest pause is that it is proximity to failure equated. At the same time, the number of like touches,
points.
the number of failure points, or like the number of touches to 0 or 1 RIR is higher in the rest pause condition.
Yep.
So I know you've already seen the results of the study. In fact, I think you're the one that notified me when this was published. But let's imagine you had no knowledge of the study. Which would you anticipate would lead to more muscle growth?
I'm going two ways because I guess I'm thinking more deeply about the fact that it is more failure points now. I think off rip, the fact that their proximity to failure equated, I probably would have just said similar.
Yeah.
But it is counterintuitive. If you do view them as independent sets of 4 with
Yeah.
a failure point at each one, that does seem marginally counterintuitive.
Yeah. That's kind of the way that I'm viewing it, is like I would have a hard time imagining the rest pause group to do way worse,
Right.
because let's say that even the rest pause doesn't work very well.
Mhm.
So, but you're still training really hard for the first mini set or first cluster of 4 reps
Mhm.
at the beginning of each set of 12.
Mm-hmm.
And you're resting sufficiently before that such that I have a hard time imagining that set of 4 isn't just as good as the set of 12 that the other group was doing. So kind of the way that I view it is like, is this a potential like hack for your training, or a potential way to get more stimulus is just to use heavier loads, rest a little bit once you get to failure, and just knock out more sets with that heavy load as you go, or even like slight drops as you go.
Yeah,
It's messy when you think about designing a study like this.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm thinking now is like how much it's so funny. I would love to see a group that also equated the number of sets, but then do the additional clusters.
So 5 sets of 4.
Yeah, exactly. I would have
Yeah.
loved to see that just to see if it was what it was doing, because yeah, that's an interesting consideration.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go too far off the weeds
Yeah.
here.
Long story short is the outcomes were pretty dang similar.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is exercise science. It is 10 participants per group. It is relatively limited assessments of muscle size. So specifically, they used DEXA to look at thigh segmental lean mass increases. And it was around 172 grams of lean mass increased for the traditional group, and about 200 grams of lean mass increased for the rest pause group. And that is, I think, like somewhere in like the 1/3 to half a pound of lean mass gained in the each thigh, which is quite a bit. So each group grew pretty well, it seems. Muscle thickness, unfortunately, was only measured for the rectus femoris, which is a bit of a bummer because the rectus femoris probably didn't get trained all that well from the leg press, but it probably did get trained pretty well from the leg extension. The traditional group increased their rectus femoris muscle thickness by about 0.17 centimeters, and the rest pause increased by about 0.24 centimeters. Don't read too much into the individual numbers I just mentioned. Long story short, we don't have any strong certainty one way or the other that one was better than the other. Of course, if we had 1,000 participants in the study, maybe there's a small difference. But I do think this serves as a nice proof of concept that they each can lead to meaningful muscle growth. And at least in small sample research like this, there doesn't seem to be an overwhelming difference between the two. So let's discuss what this means for your training and what we can actually draw from this. I don't think that finding fancy ways to like artificially increase the number of failure points is going to be something I can practically recommend. So I do think it has like theoretical rationale such that, hey, if I'm doing a set of 10 to failure, why not just put my 5 rep max on there, go to failure, then rest a little bit, maybe drop the load a little bit, and then do another set of 5 to failure. I'm getting basically more effective reps. And I do think in a lot of ways, if you were to take some interpretations of like a stimulating reps or an effective reps model, you might suspect that the rest pause group in this study would have led to more muscle growth. Again, I think there might be theoretical rationale there, but from my read of the paper, from just thinking about how this protocol would have actually played out in the lab, I think the issue is going to be practical constraints, practical issues. This is a direct quote from the discussion. It said, "The joint and neural stress generated in the in the rest pause protocol may be one of the indicators that the total volume was not appreciably greater at the end of the 8-week study period." So basically what we saw is that even though they were able to train with higher loads and they were able to get more failure points, they weren't able to progress as well week to week, and they presumably had to drop the load a decent amount from mini set to mini set as they went. So I think there are just practical issues with trying to kind of artificially increase the failure points here, and I do think it's just kind of like a reminder of how tried and true straight set approaches are, traditional set approaches are. And I'll see what you think, and then we can move on to some practical recommendations.
My main question I'm asking myself is, what, to the extent that you think there is a drop, what's the drop in stimulus between those sets of 4? In the kind of the approach there. Like, I'm so curious how much they had to drop the load.
Yeah, I wish the study reported it. They reported overall volume load for each exercise for each group, but that doesn't really tell us exactly what we want to know.
Theoretically, it's only 10 people. I know it's within the subject too. It should be theoretically higher for the cluster set group, right? Because you're
doing the same number of reps. So yeah, exactly. So that is indication that I guess you could do some back of the napkin math to kind of estimate it.
Sure. Like it looked based on the visuals here, it looks like it is higher, but not by.
It's higher. It was only significant in some weeks.
A ton, yeah.
But yeah, to your point, I guess you could kind of ballpark it and potentially estimate that by the last cluster, the last mini set, they might have been using a lower load than the 12RM group
that's
was.
What I'm thinking. Yeah, I don't know.
The traditional group
it's interesting. It's interesting because the failure point thing really has me like kind of passing it through a second time in my mind.
Yeah.
Because if you view it from that perspective, they're essentially doing more sets if you count the sets of 4 as equivalent sets.
It is kind of like indirect evidence for rest periods mattering.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Because, in a way they're doing...
Or that sets of 4 are...
I have a hard time believing that, but maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't know. I'm just... that's on the chopping block.
And I don't envy folks that have studied rest pause or drop sets, because it is tricky to, kind of weigh out the pros and cons of everything. Because, like, on one hand, you do want some of these approaches to be more time efficient, because that's when people would use them. But, yeah, it's just tricky to kind of choose what to control and what not to, because there's always kind of a give and take. Here's my recommendation overall, and I'll see if you're on board. My recommendation is to maximize the number of traditional sets you can do within your constraints. What do I mean by constraints? I mean your ability to kind of manage the fatigue from the set, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And secondly is time constraints. So a previous argument against rest pause type training or even drop set type training is that it causes more fatigue. And in my view, based on some other bodies of research we've discussed extensively on the show, that's probably less of an issue than we might have thought. So in other words, just because your fatigue the next day from doing rest pause or from doing drop set training will be higher, or some measures of muscle damage might be higher, or soreness might be higher, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, even if like the stimulus to fatigue ratio is a little bit lower. So in my opinion, what matters in terms of recovery is more within session. So I think that you should maximize your traditional sets within your constraints, and those constraints are, again, time and your ability to kind of manage your performance within a session such that it doesn't fall off so much. What does that mean? That means that if you're training quads, your first set of leg press should absolutely not be a drop set or a myo-rep or rest pause protocol, because you're probably going to take away quite a bit from the rest of your quad training in that day. Instead, I would put it near the end of sessions, and I would view rest pause or myo reps or drop sets as icing on the cake. So for example, if you only have time to do one set for an exercise, one set for a muscle within a session, awesome. Do that one set, and then use a set extension method. Use myoreps, use drop sets to just extend that set and kind of get some icing on the cake. That one set's going to be very productive. You can do rest pause. You can do drop sets to just squeeze out a little bit more stimulus. And because you're only doing that one set anyway, you're not doing anything after that, and you're not going to disrupt the effectiveness of the rest of the session.